So it looks like, what do we have for committee members on here? Myself, Sean Steele, Rocco, Rick, JD, Julie, Glenn, Stephanie, Mark, and Kenny, Charlton. So we've got Chief Murray. So we've got a good number of the committee here. I'm not sure. I don't have the list in front of me to see if we're missing anything. I don't think we are. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for attending tonight. It's go to the date. Today's November 16th, 2020, just 6 p.m. now. This is the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee. We are reconvening after a bit of a break, and this reconvening was done at the request of town administration. And basically, I've got a couple emails. I had sent you one that was relative to some financial numbers. I just want to read you the email from Julie that sort of got the discussion going. Again, about reinstituting the group and what sort of our direction will be for recommendations to the town. So the emails reads, good afternoon, Kevin. We met internally this morning to revisit the public safety facilities discussion. As Ed had mentioned, we had put the discussion on hold temporarily due to COVID and the uncertainties with regard to the town's budget. While it made sense to hold off on further discussion during the summer, now that we are in month 7 of the pandemic with no immediate end in sight, and I'll say this is dated back to 10/7 for a date on it, okay, October 7th of this year. We feel we need to move forward with a discussion on whether to build a new joint public safety facility as recommended by the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee last winter. Over the past couple of months, we had several issues at the police station, HVAC, mold, water, etc., that will continue to occur given that these appear to be chronic problems. Also importantly, during COVID-19, it became even more apparent that both police and fire facilities are not adequately equipped nor designed to handle the operational changes that the global health pandemic has required in order to maintain continuity of operations within our public safety departments. We believe that it is important to bring this to the voters next spring so that we can determine whether to continue to invest in facility improvements and upgrades, which even when performing at 100%, these buildings have been determined to be inadequate for the needs of today's fire and police operations and administration. We also feel that we should, at this time, move forward with the process as we have invested funds into the feasibility study, and importantly, the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee has invested a great deal of time into analyzing and evaluating this issue. Other reasons to move forward with the discussion include the cost of a proposed joint facility. As the consultant pointed out last winter, every delay increases the cost of the project due to the cost of materials and labor. There is a chance, however, that those cost increases could be mitigated if the project were to proceed during an economic lag or recession. During the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic conditions nationwide, there is a strong possibility that the cost of the project may be reduced by a more favorable competitive bidding climate for new construction as the construction industry is lagging at this time. Of course, depending on when this project will go out to bid, if the voters approve of it, the industry may then be recovered, but at this time, costs may be more favorable than the originally estimated by the consultants last year. So I respectfully ask that you reconvene the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee to discuss whether to move forward and bring this to the voters next spring. If the committee is still in favor of doing so, then we would suggest that we begin to schedule a series of informational public meetings to be held over the winter in advance of a special town meeting in March, or the annual town meeting in May, so that we can discuss the best approach. Then the annual election in May would include a ballot question, which by then would hopefully have already been vetted and voted by town meeting. I am happy to discuss this with you in further detail, but I wanted to let you know how we envision this process would work if the committee is willing to proceed with its recommendations. So that was the email that sort of started us getting back on track, getting back together. I think it's probably, does anybody have any questions relative to that email before I turn it over to Julie to update us if anything's changed since that October email a month or so ago? Okay. If no questions, Julie, did you want to speak on behalf of the town administration as to what brought that on and kind of fill in some details?
Sure. Thanks. And Mr. Chairman, thank you to all the committee members. I just want to also point out that we have appointed a new committee member, Sean Steele, from the Fire Rescue Department. So welcome, Sean, and thanks for doing this. So we had one of the members that was no longer able to serve. So Sean from the Fire Rescue Department and an Auburn resident is participating in the committee. So thank you all. Nice to see you. It's nice to see your faces on the tiles here. We're getting used to the remote meeting format, so we appreciate you doing this in the safety of your homes. So what really brought this on is over the course of the summer, myself, both chiefs, Ed Kazanovich, who's also on, and Lieutenant Lemon, and Deputy Chief Johnson, yeah, I see him. We had got together probably in June and talked about, how is this going to play out with COVID? How is it going to play out with getting committees across the board back together? And what should we be doing with regard to the recommendations that had initially come out of this committee? So at that time, as we all were, we were hoping that the worst of COVID would be over and we'd start to return to whatever our new normal is or was going to be. And it soon became apparent that that wasn't going to be happening. Ed Kazanovich, as the Assistant Town Manager and CFO, at that time, we did not know what our finances were going to be. We didn't know what the state budget was going to be. We didn't really know what position we were going to be in for this current fiscal year. But I think it's important to point out that regardless of this current year or next year as a fiscal year, you're talking about a project, if it does proceed, that wouldn't kick in for probably close to a year and a half to 2 years, with the permanent debt kicking in even later than that. So we felt that we wanted to get the committee, we wanted to wait for the summer, see if we could get any more information about the financial situation from the state, see if there were going to be any 9C cuts, any other reductions in our revenue sources, which obviously there were, and then get the committee to reconvene in the fall. So that's why I had reached out to the chair to see if the committee would be willing to get back together again and revisit the conversation. I want to jump in and let Chief Coleman and Chief Slukas and any of the other town staff that were in those meetings speak up. Lieutenant Lemon, Deputy Chief Johnson, and also I want to point out from Tecton we have Jeff and Matt who are here tonight. So I think Chief Coleman, I think you've been working with them. They're going to be presenting a little something tonight on some updated numbers, if that's okay through the chair. So that's what brought us here. So Chief Slukas and Chief Coleman, is there anything you wanted to add?
Thank you, Julie. Through the chair, we had asked Matt from Tecton to prepare a short presentation once the committee members, however you want to proceed, whether you want the committee to speak first or have Matt do a short presentation. We felt it was important to give the committee, an opportunity to see what else is going on around the state. What are other communities doing? What does the current construction climate look like? Mr. Kazanovich can talk a little bit about percentage ratings and bonding that, as we look at it, very favorable conditions right now and how that plays into this project. So Matt and Jeff from Tecton are able to present and sort of give a little snapshot as to what is going on around the state with this current climate. That might be a good opportunity as a starting point for committee members to generate questions.
Thank you, Chief. And also through the chair, Kevin, if I may say, Ed Kazanovich has done a lot of work looking at some revised numbers and working with our bond counsel and our financial advisors at Unibank to come up with what an average impact would be to the average single-family homeowner based on current valuations. And I believe that we had shared that with you, Mr. Chairman, and I think you had circulated it to the board. But so Ed is here to answer any questions related to that as well.
Sure. Why don't we'll see if Tecton wants to give their presentation, and then we'll maybe have Ed discuss what those numbers would look like in terms of taxpayer dollars and how that would roll out. Matt, you want to?
Yeah, allow me to share my screen. I think I need to be made presenter.
Working. Yep, there you go. Good job, Chris.
Oh, sharing the wrong screen, I think. You see the presentation screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Good evening, everybody. It's been a while. It's good to see everybody again. We've been talking back and forth with Chief Coleman throughout the summer here and there, both about the project and actually also about pandemic response and how it relates to police and fire station design in the future. We've been sort of working with all the chiefs in our network about how this is going to impact buildings going forward, and if we need to, we can talk about that. But what we wanted to share today was just a brief recap on sort of where we left off last January. Touch briefly on the opinion of probable cost that we had for the public safety facility. Then we wanted to talk briefly about how that compares throughout the Commonwealth to other public safety projects over the past 15 or so years. We're going to talk about construction cost escalation, and that's something that we've touched on in the past. We've been talking about these budgetary numbers, and that was mentioned briefly at the onset of this meeting about how as time goes on, these projects get more expensive, and then we're going to sort of show in brief sort of an assumption of where we see the market going and how the trends are starting to look as they're impacted by the current economic situation that we're in and how they're affected by the pandemic. And then we want to touch briefly on two projects that we've had go to the voters this past November, the Shrewsbury Police Station and the CHARLTON Public Safety Facility, both with different results when they hit the ballot. And we want to talk about reasons why they had favorable or non-favorable outcomes when they went to the voters. And then we can certainly open it up for any discussion and comments to any of these slides. So when we left off last January, we had loosely landed on two preferred sites. The one that we had called the Low site on Southbridge Street. And this was sort of the layout that we had come up with here. Over the next couple of months, we want to start digging into these sites and come up with a little bit more of a developed, detailed plan. But we just wanted to remind everybody sort of where we had left off with some of these layouts. And then the other one being the Shaw site, both of which require an acquisition of land by the city. Just a brief reminder of where we were with the budget. We were looking at just under a 52,000 square foot facility for the combined public safety building with a construction cost of just shy of $33 million for the building itself in hard construction costs. And just as a point of reference, back when we came up with these budget numbers, we were looking at an annual escalation rate between 5 and 7% per year. So every year that goes on, that $32.8 million would theoretically increase 5 to 7% each year, and that would compound year over year. And then the project development cost, or the soft cost for that, was putting the total project budget right around $37.26 billion for the entire project. And what we had determined in looking at this option versus the three separate buildings is this resulted in a net savings of somewhere between $5 and $7 million. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but there was a significant savings, and that was part of why we had chosen, the committee had chosen to proceed with the single facility option. And part of why we chose those two sites as the preferred options was predominantly based on their location within town and accessibility to the community, but as well as the response time analysis that was done by the deputy chief. So where does this relate to the Commonwealth in terms of other public safety facilities? So these go all the way back to about 2007, and these are varying communities throughout the Commonwealth of different sized populations, and they all result in different sized buildings. And as a one thing to note is that when we put this analysis together for Shrewsbury a couple of months ago, and we realized that we were trying to find a correlation between population size and the size of these public safety facilities, and it really wasn't there. And what we were finding was that the size of these was based on the need of the departments, and a lot of that had to do with call volume, which is directly tied to staff size. So you can see by this that other communities of similar size have larger facilities, and other ones of similar size have smaller sizes. So you're sort of right in the middle, and so I think this just tells that the size of this joint public safety building is sort of reasonable, and it makes a lot of sense. And that was born out of quite a number of conversations with both this committee and the various departments. So we've talked about construction cost escalation, and that makes a lot of sense to people in the construction industry and Jeff and I, but not everybody understands what that means. And looking at this graph, you don't really understand what it means either, because it just doesn't make any sense at first glance. But Turner Construction is one of the leading contractors nationally, and they put out this quarterly analysis of construction cost escalation. And what this index refers to on the left-hand side there, where you see second quarter 2020, the index is at 1177. This is based off of a baseline from 1960, where if we were to look at a building and say it cost $100 to build in 1960, it would cost $1,177 in today's climate. And so what this allows us to do by looking at that index is see the third column, which is that delta percentage change. And that's the quarterly change in the top graph and the annual change below that per year. So that shows you how much construction cost changes annually. And you'll notice that in 2017, 18, 19, it was in the 5 to 6% range. And that's the amount that a project is going to cost between 1 year and the next. So that's how much it increases, and that's vastly outpacing inflation. And there's a number of reasons why. But if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see 2009 and 2010, and that's during the last recession. And you'll notice that the market was retracting at that time because of a significant decrease in new construction projects throughout the United States and globally. And certainly this current climate that we're in this recession is not the same as it was in 2008 and 9. And we can't expect that the results are going to be the same. You know, people are talking about this V-shaped or recovery, and we don't really know what the market is going to do. But if we were to follow the same trend line, we would see over the next couple of years favorable market conditions in terms of escalation. Right now, working with a lot of construction managers and contractors and our estimators, we're seeing a conservative number in the 3% range for an escalation rate right now, which is 50% of what it was a year ago. So we are seeing that retraction. What we aren't seeing in the market is a decrease in construction projects coming online. There's still just as much work essentially as there was a year ago, but we are seeing increased competition among contractors. That's what's driving right now the decrease in escalation. And that's simply because of the uncertainty over the next year. Contractors right now are trying to fill their backlog because they don't know what's going to be coming out on the streets over the next 6 to 12 months. So they want to make sure that they have enough projects in the queue to keep themselves busy in case things start to deteriorate in the market. So what does that mean to this project in terms of escalation? If the numbers were to remain where they are in the 3 to 3.5% escalation, which is a conservative number at this time, for a $32 million construction cost. We're looking at about an increase of $100,000 monthly. And again, that compounds over time, so that continues to go up. Currently, what we're seeing in the market, we think this is a worst case scenario, and we're hoping for better results than that. And what we've seen recently on bids coming out is that number is improving to our benefit. And we'll be able to show those figures when we review the CHARLTON Public Safety Building, which just took general contractor bids a little less than a month ago. So we're going to touch briefly on just a couple of precedents, and we want to show this because we want to give you an understanding of where other communities are in the market and whether or not they're moving forward with projects. So the first one is the Shrewsbury Police Station, and this just went to the ballot on November 3rd. It's just shy of 40,000 square feet, and it has a construction cost of $27.5 million, with a project cost just below $37 million. We're also doing a $5 million estimated radio infrastructure upgrade countywide. So the entire appropriation on the ballot was a $42 million debt override. We're looking to solicit for their bonds for full project funding on right after January 1. And based on what they're seeing other communities with similar bond ratings are procuring in the market, they're looking at an anticipated interest rate between 1.6 and 1.9%, which is a significantly low interest rate. It's historically low. So that, on top of the potential bid savings based on the contraction that we might be seeing in the construction market, there's further savings over the life of the bond on top of that. And just as a side note, because of the type of the project and the size of it, we're using an alternative delivery method called construction manager at risk under Mass General Law Chapter 149A, and it allows us to actually phase out the construction process with a construction manager. It allows us to get in the ground early to take advantage of more favorable pricing as escalation continues. So this led to a favorable vote. It passed at town meeting overwhelmingly. It was something like 150 to 5 in favor of the project, and it was a 60% to 40 yes vote on the ballot. And there were a number of conditions that led to that favorable vote. And a lot of it had to do with the engagement of the committee and the various boards with the town itself. So there was a multifaceted approach to that community engagement, some of which we were involved with, some of which we weren't. And that involved lots of presentations to various groups, public outreach throughout the town. The committee instituted a public interface with their own website as well as a Facebook page where they were able to take public comment and respond to that both from town management and the police department as well as the committees. They produced, and with our help, a series of informational videos on the condition of the station, as well as insight into the department and how they function over the years and how they envision themselves into the future. They also created a specific community outreach group specifically for the ballot initiative. So there was a separate group from the committees that actually involved themselves in community engagement just for the ballot vote. And there was unanimous public support among all of the various boards and committees in the town that include, like, from finance, the select board, and the building committee. The project was also, again, bundled with that radio infrastructure upgrade. They have a failing radio system throughout the town, so there was a critical need for both the police station, the new police station, as well as the radio infrastructure upgrade. And they currently have separate emergency communication systems for each department. So creating a unified dispatch was also a part of the selling point. And the town has a history of successful implementation of construction projects. So they've built a long-standing public trust within their community. So it made it easier for the town to support this project because they knew that long track record of successful projects was going to be followed through on this one as well. The next project we want to talk about is CHARLTON Public Safety, and Jeff was much more involved with that, so I'm going to have him jump in.
Okay. So we just received bids in October, and this project proceeded a little bit in an unusual fashion in that we actually had gone to town meeting quite a while ago and passed very handily in town meeting, but then went to the vote for the debt override and failed. The Board of Selectmen, after that failure to get the financing in place, the apparatus for paying for the project that had been approved by town meeting, decided that they should proceed with the project and then come back around again with bids in hand so that the town could vote on the actual cost rather than a projected cost based on a bid. So they put together the money to pay our fee to do the construction documents. And we did that over about a 9-month period, which was fairly escalated in terms of the speed of getting that done. But we were able to get the whole project completed and out to bid and received our bids in October. Our low bid was $22,025,000, and you can see the high bid was only a couple million more than that. The big story of the day was we were $2.6 million under our budget, which I have to attribute in no small part to market conditions currently. And the bidding was very tight. So again, it's it was a $34 million. Well, I'm sorry, it's a $24 million projected construction cost, and then projected up to the current days would be. I'm sorry, the total project cost was $34,235,000. So, unfortunately, we did go to the ballot on November 3rd, and by a very slim margin, the town voted not to proceed into construction. So we had gone through all the process of creating documents and design drawings and getting all of the approvals, and we're not building a building, which never feels good to us. But I did highlight a few, and I'm not trying to pick on people, but I did highlight a few of the things that stood out to me as some issues with the town of Charlton's process. And, I do think that with the failed ballot vote last year, that the town was trying to send a message that they weren't in favor of this big project, this combined project. And the building committee actually went to the select board at one point and suggested that they scale back into a fire station only, which is what a lot of members of the committee were hearing from the public. And the select board decided to proceed with the public safety building. And I think, again, when we went to vote in August, the town once again said that's more than we're on board for. I think another big problem was that the town was not sold on the deficiencies of the police station. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the police station in Charlton, but you drive by and it looks like a pretty reasonable building. It's a nice brick building. It looks to be in really good condition from the exterior. And we were not, as part of our scope, given the task of evaluating the building and conducting a conditions assessment on it. And so we were not in a position to say that there were substantial deficiencies as part of that existing condition that would limit its use in the future, which was a difficult position for us to be in, to not to be able to comment about that specifically. There was a plan for reuse of that building for another municipal purpose that I don't think was well understood in the community. One big difference that I see certainly saw in Shrewsbury that I didn't see in Charlton, is that members of the committee and town leadership were a big part of the dialogue with the community. And when we went to town meeting, our part of the presentation, which Matt and the chief of police did together in Shrewsbury, was, our part was fairly small compared to the overall presentation. And what I wrote down there at the end there is that voters like to hear from their peers and leaders, not just out of town experts. So I think making sure that the committee and the leadership is involved in explaining the project and communicating the importance of it is really important. It's in these times more than ever, it's easy not to believe an expert from out of town. You need to hear it from your own folks. And another big issue that came into play in the community was many of the promotional events of the project where presentations were given. I think the fire department, led by Mr. Barton, who was one of the committee members, did some absolutely fantastic presentations. Really informative. He did a great job presenting, great graphics to support it, but we did not see the same level of engagement by the police department. And they were a big part of the project, and yet they were not as engaged in the presentation. And I think that really showed to the community as well. And then the last item I wrote, there was some political issues that occurred at the very outset of the project. I have to believe that left a little bit of mistrust in leadership, because the former town manager had started the project and ended up leaving the community. And I'm sure that left a little bit of a lack of trust in the process at that point. So I think it was a good project, and it was a good project for the community, but there was just not that sort of essential buy-in and the essential representation in the dialogue about the project from some community leadership and from the police department. So unfortunately, we're not building this one right now.
So I think I'll just leave off before I turn it back over to the chair, is that what we've seen is that the communities that are moving forward with these projects are recognizing that the time is right because the buildings need to be done, and the time is right because the market is very favorable right now to move forward with these projects. It's mustering the support from the public to get them to understand that it's not going to be any cheaper to build a building than it is during these times. And that it really is the right time to move forward with these projects. And that's been a heavy part of the pitch from town management where these projects have been going forward. So I don't think that looking at COVID and where we are right now is something to look at as a negative impact on the construction market. I think it's something that we can really take advantage of. So I think with that, we can turn it over and take any comments or questions and just be part of an open discussion on this.
Anybody, members of the committee, have any questions for Tecton at this point?
Kevin, I do. He mentioned Shaw's there. I thought we had voted that would not be a site.
Yeah, I saw that one as well. And
the second site that we were considering, I think, was the Sears site.
Correct. Yeah, the Sears site was our secondary one, but it's been a little bit since we built a map, but we'll make sure he makes the corrections on that one.
Okay.
Any other, Rick, you got any other questions for these guys? Other than that was, I think that was an error in the presentation. I think that was our number 3 site and didn't make our cut.
No, I'm all set.
Okay, Rick. Anybody else have any questions relative to the, it sounds like there's been some good lessons learned from the other neighboring projects. Unfortunately, I think Charlton's more in line financially than Shrewsbury, much wealthier community. But While we're on the question of numbers, I think that was one of my initial response to that email I read to you earlier to Julie. I had to send her a list of questions back, and I met with her, and she was able to answer most of these for me. Was basically in challenging times, as much as it's good for construction costs, there are also people that are worried about where their next paycheck is coming from and supporting their families. You know, is this the right time for the taxpayers? And then this will kind of lead to asking Mr. Kasnovich to speak, you know, the financial timeline for wrapping up the current debt. And you did provide us that email that I shared with the committee as to what the numbers look like in terms of debt and wrapping up some of our existing projects and how this would fall into line and the effects on the taxpayers. Ed, do you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the challenges town administration faces for a project of this magnitude is how can we best finance this with the least impact on the taxpayers of the community. Unlike other projects, this becomes more challenging because when you're looking at financing a school project, you apply a different approach to financing the project. In other words, first of all, in a school construction project, you're getting a MSBA reimbursement somewhere in the vicinity of 60 cents on every dollar. And when you net that out, you're borrowing a lot less money for a project than the public safety building, where we have to cover 100% of that total cost. Setting COVID aside, market conditions couldn't be better for borrowing money. Short-term rates are low, long-term rates are low, but we have to consider how we best model that. Typically, we try to retire debt in the shortest period of time. I think when you look into this project, I think we would be looking at the opposite. We'll probably go out for a period longer than we would like to, only because it waters down the effect on the taxpayers of the community. And I think that's going to become an important piece to this whole thing in trying to sell this thing, to try to minimize that impact, not only on the residents, but the commercial taxpayers as well. So when we look at this project on its own, if we were to go out and borrow $46 million over a 30-year period, it's about 95 cents to the residential homeowner at a 30-year period. Certainly you go out for, if you go out for a bond at 25 years or 20 years, it escalates that cost. So that's one consideration. Number two, how do we time this? When do we go out and borrow the money? Do we have overlapping debt with the high school that we're retiring in 2024? I would say no, because you want to leverage that retirement of debt at the high school and then the following year apply it towards the public safety facility to minimize the impact. So, for an example, if we went out for $46 million on its own, it'd be 95 cents on a 30-year purpose to the residential homeowner. If we retire the high school debt in 2024, short-term borrow for a period of 2 to 3 years on the public safety facility, and just make an interest payment only on the amount of money that you're borrowing, fold in your permanent debt when you retire the high school debt, that 95 cents per thousand goes down to 43 cents per thousand. So as you can see, it has a much of a less impact. It makes it more palatable, and hopefully a model like that would be able to be sold to the taxpayers, provided that they approve the project when it goes to them as a debt exclusion vote. So I think there's no question it has to go to the taxpayers. This amount should be raised outside of the levy, outside of 2.5, to give our residents and our taxpayers an opportunity to say whether they want to go forward with the project or not. So I think we have to have a plan in place. We've been working on something. I just wanted to float those numbers out to you. I think it's important to remember that if this project does move forward, it would be best to time it, the long-term debt, when we're retiring the high school debt, so that minimizes the impact on all taxpayers. So, Mr. Chairman, that's some of the information we came up with. Certainly, we tied in the cost of the building itself with land acquisition to come up with a total cost of $46 million. Whether that number is going to move north or south, I'm sure it's going to move based upon market conditions and in how the bids come in, and whether or not the building is looked at once again to either consider some modifications or put it out there as is, as it stands right now. We just don't know.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kazanovich. Any questions from the committee relative to, it was kind of a brief overview of the financing and the timeline, and any questions relative to the financial?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I just want to mention, in my conversations with Mr. Kazanovich, I think it's important for not only the committee, but if we move forward on this project, I think one of the things that's very important that we make sure that the residents understand is that because we are going to retire the high school debt before we go out to borrow for this project, essentially what that means is that paying for this project with the additional 40 some odd cents that Mr. Kazanovich mentioned, if that was the number, that's not going to be realized by the taxpayer until probably, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Kazanovich, either fiscal 24 or the beginning of fiscal 25. So it can sometimes be easy to ask that question, which I think is an absolute appropriate question. It's one that town administration has been asking since March, which is, what do we move forward on? What do we hold off on? I think those are decisions we've been making over the last 9 months. But I think it's critical that when we're talking about a decision like this, that although it's easy to say or ask the question, is this the right time? This is also something that financially is not going to be hitting the taxpayers for another 5 years. So I think that's important to think about. I thought it was a point worth mentioning.
Thank you, Chief. Anybody else questions?
I have a question. I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Rocco.
Yes, sir.
Are we to assume that both properties that were mentioned are available for purchase? Obviously, Sears was taken off, and I assume that was because it's not available or it doesn't suit our needs. But is the Lowe's and the Shaw's property available for purchase? Should we decide to try and purchase them?
I think if someone on the can correct on that, I believe the reference to Shaw's was a mistake. I think that should have been a Yankee Drummer / Lowe's in the Sears site. Should still be the two, unless something has changed that I'm not aware of. Because I'm going to speak to the two sites that are still in contention here.
Mr. Chair, I can tell you that the Lowe's site is still on the market, from my understanding. There's been no proposed sale for that property yet. And as far as the Sears property, it has not been on the market, but we all knew at the time that there would be probably some changes being made to Sears, and that area probably is becoming available. But I don't believe it's openly on the market, although I can tell you that I believe mall management is looking to reutilize the Sears property.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask one question?
Yes, sorry, we got so many tiles here. Who's
Go ahead,
Mr.
Andy.
Chairman, thank you.
Chief Lucas.
I guess I'll shoot it over to Tecton. Is there an advantage or a disadvantage, one way or the other, based upon your experience with purchasing a property that is available and for sale versus eminent domain takings? Is that far more expensive? Or could you get a lower price because the asking price is ridiculous, and if you did a land taking, it would actually save money?
Generally, what we find when eminent domain comes into play, that the time is the big factor. It takes oftentimes a very long time to seize a piece of property, and there's obviously costs associated with that whole process as well. But then you're also letting escalation take an impact on your project while you're waiting for that acquisition period. I have seen very few effective eminent domain processes for public projects. It tends to put a sour note on the viewpoint of the voters when you take a property.
Okay.
I can't speak directly to whether or not you're likely to get less money. I mean, obviously, the value of the property is a big factor when you're going through the eminent domain process.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Andy, there's an element of risk by going that route as well. So the property owner that you're taking the property from has 3 years to challenge it in court. The town would pay what they call a pro tanto payment, but the owner has 3 years to take us to court and to challenge that out. As a result of that, there's an element of risk. You have legal costs, you have appraisal fees, and you ultimately have a settlement that could cost the town a lot more money than you would pay by negotiating or a friendly payment. So I would not suggest the town go that route.
Okay.
Through the chair, if I can also just add in that, just a reminder, the town can't just select a site and make an offer on that site. We have to go through a bid process. So you can tailor your bid to seek proposals and solicit bids from property owners in a certain area. You can make it a geographic area, you can make it a radius, you can make it a price range, but the town just can't come forward and say, we'd like to offer you money. It would have to go out to bid. So for instance, you put it out to bid that you're looking for an 8-acre parcel between this area and this area. There's one potential way to get around that, and Town Council Hennigan's still not 100% sure that we're able to do that, and that would be sole source, where you look at a property and there's no other properties imaginable in the whole town that could meet your needs other than that one property. And if that is the only one property, then the town has the ability to go through that process. But the state frowns on that. Town Council Hennigan is a little concerned because there could be challenges to that. So I'd say the best way to look at this is it would probably have to go out to bid. We'd explain through an RFP what type of property we are looking for, and then property owners who are in that area could put a bid forth to us.
Thank you. Any other questions, financial questions? I did have one for TechDon, and it's, based on, my public safety background is, do you see any changes in the way you're going to start developing your public safety, your architect plans for these buildings coming forward? And I'll just use it for instance, bringing in arrests into facilities was sort of frowned upon during the high points of this pandemic, to the point where the push has sort of gone towards utilizing, sort of getting the regional sheriffs involved to process where they have health clearance and stuff like that, and not holding prisoners for lengths of time. So that's just for instance, one example, maybe that the number of cells in your ideal facility would go from, 6 to 3 because you're only going to hold short-term custodies. anything design-wise that you could see changing in terms of facility that may either increase cost due to new standards in air filtration, or is in some things that you may take off the block because we're not going to be putting 50 or 100 people in a meeting room probably anytime soon in any facility in the area or the country.
So yeah, there's first off to your point about holding facilities. In my 30 years of doing this, I have seen a decline in the number of cells that we put into police facilities anyway. More and more departments are less inclined to hold lots of people for extended period of time. So, I mean, I've even seen departments that are building stations with fewer cells than they currently have. So that's been a trend that's been going on for a long time. I do think that there are an awful lot of lessons learned that have come out of the whole exercise. Ventilation is a huge factor. And even when we look at energy recovery, the kinds of energy recovery systems that we're incorporating into new buildings, we use an energy recovery wheel or a process that helps limit the amount of air exchange, the return air into the system, so that you're exhausting more, but you're still recovering the heat, so that you're not bringing potentially contaminated air back into the building. There's lots of things that have been thrown out about UV filters and ionization, and I'm not sure that I'm as convinced on some of those, but absolutely ventilation is a huge key. And then creating the opportunity for some isolation, some separation, particularly when you have interfaces with various portions of the department. Matt spent a fair amount of time on the Shrewsbury police station plans, creating a little bit of a compartmentalization so that you can maintain a physical distance and that sort of non-contact opportunity with partitions and barriers. Matt, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you pretty much covered it, Jeff. I think really what we're trying to do is find ways to allow for, police stations 20 years ago in particular was a lot about all these compartmentalization of different departments and in groups. And over the past 15, 20 years, it's been the opposite of that and bringing everybody together and having a more open and collaborative environment. And now we're sort of taking a step back towards the way it used to be, to allow different groups to operate in segments while to reduce the risk of spread. But it really is about finding opportunities to allow for that collaborative environment, but also segmenting different groups off so that there isn't that type of spread in case there is infection or something like that. But this is an ongoing conversation, and it's something that we're working with a number of different chiefs to come up with new solutions as the different challenges have presented themselves. So it's something that's going to be unique to each department, and it's going to be an ongoing development as time goes on.
Okay, so I mean, as far as the costs that were put up, I mean, is there some discussion that those plans, discussion with the needs of the department may get looked at to decide as the programming space and things of that nature to see if there are any savings that can be made on the proposal should this move forward?
Yeah, I think in some of the areas, in administrative areas and things like that, in the offices, we would probably see that the cost would slightly increase. One, because of the added cost for additional filtration, larger fans with the HVAC system, things like that. And then the ability to compartmentalize some of these things, like in an administrative office, we'll create a vestibule so that the rest of the staff can come in and interact with the chief without actually having to come in physical contact. That adds a little bit of square footage, but like you mentioned, if we're going to a more regionalized lockup system in reducing the number of cells in the prisoner intake areas, that would certainly realize a significant savings because it's one of the more expensive pieces to the building. So I think it's going to be really program specific as we get into it with both departments and see what their vision is going to be as far as what we can take out and not based on the impact of this whole thing. I wish I had a more straightforward answer.
Oh, that's fine. I guess my other question, you mentioned some separation, but is there any concern, even nationally with your industry that combined public safety complexes should one, a spread of a pandemic take one fire group out, that you've then taken out your entire public safety network by one building that's now needs to be taken offline for X period of time?
Not necessarily, because the nature of a public safety facility isn't like the fire and police offices are all in the same wing of the building. It's very often that they're separated by floors or by different wings. The way we've been doing fire stations for quite some time now, recognizing these sort of hot and cold zones and the transition zones and dealing with pathogens and carcinogens as the firefighters are returning from a call. We can take that sort of understanding of isolating decontamination zones and apply that to the rest of the facility. So I think it's not as much of a risk because it's all in one building, because it's separated out in various ways with different HVAC systems. Not everything's all tied together. So I don't think the risk is really going to be there.
Yeah, I think I want to build on that idea that, of all the buildings that Tecton does, and we do other stuff other than public safety in the office, there is a lot of compartmentalization that goes into a public safety building that doesn't into other types of buildings. The dispatch area is, by definition, by the code standards, an isolated air zone. You're not mixing the air from other parts of the building, certainly not the public lobby, but the parts of the police or fire department with that. And likewise, the detention areas in the facility are always under an exhaust circumstance, so we're not recirculating any of that air. So you've got a lot of different zones and isolated air systems throughout a public safety building. And that's even before we start looking at the increased ventilation and filtration that we use in response to a pandemic situation.
Okay, any other questions here for Tecton?
I had a kind of a two-part question. Just listening to Julie, that we would need to put out a bid for a piece of property. How would that sequence? Do we do some sort of design with the architect and then put something out to bid looking for different parcels? Or do we put the parcels out and then, once we find one, go to the architect? What's the sequencing of that? The other question I had, I think we were talking of $525 a square foot. And I think I asked the question last year, how much of that $525 is for site costs? Obviously, if you're going to build at one site, it's going to be a different cost for the site work than it would be another one. So we should know that at this point before we're, if we're going to be putting out an RFP for sites, we should know how much of that $525 they've included anticipating site costs for there. I mean, it can be, Christ, the high school, I think, was $9 million in site work. So it can vary an awful lot. And that's something that we should know early in the process, I think. And the real question, though, is for Julie, is how do you anticipate that this thing would sequence as far as the bids? An RFP for the property, and then we go looking for the building design, or just how it's going to work?
Well, I would actually turn, through the chair, if you don't mind, I would turn to Jeff and Matt as to what the sequencing is, because this does make it an unusual project in that, compared to some other communities, we don't currently own the land. So we can't design to the land because we're not going to know which property would come in on a bid. Right. So Jeff, my understanding is, and Matt, that you could create a design that would fit either parcel, and then obviously there are going to be nuances to either one that would then have to be designed as well. But you don't want to design the building without knowing the land. So I would think from a sequencing perspective, we'd want to go out to bid for the land first before your final design. But I do know that Tecton would be able to develop some plans based on generalities of both of those sites. Is that right, Jeff?
Well, to an extent. It's always ideal to have, a parcel that you're designing for first, because the topography and the shape of the parcel can tell you a lot about how to design. So for instance, on a smaller parcel, I want to keep my building footprint as small as I possibly can, and that might mean more vertical space, so I might go to a third floor to try to keep my footprint small. Whereas on a bigger parcel, it may be more cost effective not to look in that direction. The other big factor is topography. It just so happened I spent a little bit of time looking at the Lowe's site and looking at some of the topographic information. And it starts to tell me a little bit about what that building might be shaped like and what might be the optimal way to fit the building into the site. And, that's part of how we determine what percentage of the overall cost is site cost. There's a lot of sites out there that if you let the building respond to the site, then you can mitigate your site costs. Whereas if you go in with the attitude, we're gonna bulldoze it all flat and deal with that can sometimes raise your site cost. So what I would look for if we wanted to proceed with some sort of a conceptual design to get some better understanding about the distribution of cost is I would start by looking at commonalities between the two sites, such that anything that I put on paper stays viable, no matter which site, or even, heaven forbid, we end up getting a third proposal on a site that we haven't even seen yet. I would probably at this level, recommend that the town not go too far down the road of finalizing design concepts until you have a site in hand, but getting something that you could present to the community and use as a tool for dialogue and to start to define the distribution of site cost versus building cost is probably a worthwhile endeavor. And of course, if you just want to go get a site and then come back and do design, that's possible too. It's going to just extend your overall period before you get a new project.
Thanks, Jeff. Rick, did that?
Yeah, at least it gives us an idea. I think we really need to, in my mind, we need to know of that 525 a square foot, how much is building and how much is site. And I obviously they don't have a site that they're dealing with, but there must be a number in there when they're telling us that's what it would cost to build this building. There's got to be a component of that is for the site work, and it's going to be different on one site than it is another.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's done some research on the preferred site, and I agree that it is the preferred site, but that's not a flat site by any stretch of the imagination. And
I will say that as I started looking at it, the diagram that Matt put up earlier started to evolve quite a bit, and I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I started looking at how do I orient the apparatus bay on a portion of the site that gives me the sort of more level area so that I have to do less grading. And then how do I get from that area down to the roadway, which is a drop of maybe 10 to 15 feet. How do I stretch that to make sure that my apparatus flow stays at a low percentage so that I don't have problems moving the apparatus out to the main road? And that started to tell me a little bit about the shape of the building.
Right.
Beyond that, having spent a few hours on it, I'm not prepared yet to say, do I think there's an excessive site burden on this particular site? My initial look says probably not, but I'd want to spend a little more time on it before I decided that.
Julie, you mentioned the proposal going out relative to the site. So if this committee asks the town, and we, make a recommendation that we proceed to start moving this back along again, is the town able to go out and do a request for a proposal, an RFP for land, and that would possibly bring it down to a singular site? Because I think that uncertainty for a site is going to make it you're going to lose some supporters either way, because I think some may be proponents of one site as opposed to another. But I think if we came down, and I think maybe we know one site is priced a little high, maybe in this market that site will come down. But if we say it's a site and we give a cap for what we're willing to spend on site, is that able to be put in a proposal and see if we come back with a singular site as it moves forward before it gets to the town meeting and the voters to make some purchases?
Through the chair, I think we would have to talk to town council on how to word it. I know we wouldn't put an RFP out to purchase a site if we don't have the funds in hand to actually make that purchase. So it may be more of an RFQ, which is a request for qualifications, versus an RFP, which is actually seeking a proposal for someone to submit the site. So I think there's probably a way that it could be done prior to a town meeting vote, but again, it can't be the town saying, we're seeking someone to give us a proposal for a site at X amount of dollars, and we would want to close on this date because we won't at that point even have the funding or the approval of the funding in hand. So I think it does have to go more the RFQ route.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chief.
I think you are 100% correct. I think you're right on track with your thinking in terms of narrowing it down to a single site, because, again, you're going to lose people, but you're also going to have people who say, well, we should have done it here, and we should have done it here. And I think by doing the request for qualifications and then ultimately an RFP, you sort of take that argument out of people's hands, because when we put the RFQ out and that information goes to all of the property owners within that, radius, people are either going to submit an RFQ or they're not. And if they don't, then ultimately you have to assume that that property is not available because they're not interested in selling it. So I think you're right on track in terms of taking some of that argument, if you will, out of the way of it should have gone here or it should have gone there. Because if a preferred site that somebody thinks it should be built on was never available in the first place, then it's sort of ammunition for the committee or town administration to say the site wasn't available, so it couldn't have gone there.
Thanks, Chief. And I've discussed this with Julie too, and those that have been in town back to the high school, and it's Rocco, maybe you can answer, how many attempts do we have at a high school proposal before we actually have this facility we have now?
I think I ran out of fingers when I was counting. Quite a few. Short answer is quite a few. Quite a few.
And a lot of that, correct me if I'm wrong, was based on some unanswered questions that some of the voters had questions, and there was some undetermined as to what was going to happen with other entities and things of that nature. Can you just kind of speak to that for a bit? Because this is our first outside of school buildings sort of project.
It was a lot of uncertainties, yes, but there was a lot of nostalgia. A lot of the people that graduated from that school and went to that school still love that school, and they want that school with the dome and with all those things. That's what they wanted. And as time went on and different proposals were made, none seemed to fit what the majority of people wanted until they could finally get a site that was similar to where the old site was, and somehow it came through. It was a lot of hard work, but like I said, it was years and years, and I think Rick might have been involved in that. Weren't you, Rick? Were you involved in that?
Yeah, we were. If you remember, the town actually had total plans prepared for Prospect Street.
Right.
And that's the reason I'm bringing this up now, because the site numbers weren't determined. They were being determined as they went along. And when the actual numbers became evident, it just didn't work. And that's all I'm trying to avoid here now.
Right.
I think the
Prospect Street was prohibitive. Right.
I think the site we're looking at is fine now.
Yeah.
I'm just saying we should have a much better idea of the site numbers, or at least what we're accommodating, what we're including in our
Right.
estimates for site numbers.
Right. And Kevin, one thing I didn't see in the past that I see here is I didn't see the unity and the total commitment towards a new high school that I kind of see here with this safety committee, safety facilities committee. So I think we have a step up on that. And I think if what Chief Coleman said and that we have a site, we go for that site, and if that's the site that we pick, I think it would relieve a lot of angst with people.
I agree. I think the only other pieces, I like the way Matt presented how Shrewsbury kind of did a collective campaign that's, multifaceted campaign to make it happen. But I think in doing so, as this moves forward, should the committee decide to move the process forward, is some of those obvious questions that are going to be out there, and we've probably all gotten them from people already, is, what are they going to do with the West Street site? Well, the market's fallen, is gone for commercial real estate. We're going to end up with another, in the interim paying X amount of dollars for insurance for a vacant building. If the school committee goes to the police station, they've had some health related stuff over there. How much are we going to have to, work we're going to have to do there cost wise to get that into a nice healthy building to fit other needs. So I think there's some questions just collectively as this goes forward. All those things sort of have to line up in addition to the dollars and cents, which will be the priority one for people. But I think some of those other things we sort of have to have an answer for folks as we go forward. And maybe Julie, you can just maybe speak to some of those concerns. I know you had talked to the school superintendent relative to what they would be willing to do and thoughts on the other building. So.
I did. I talked to Dr. Handfield just to see if he would be on board, as the former superintendent was, with the potential to move the school administration into the police station. And he said, if that's something that it would take to get this project done, and that was what the community wanted, he would have no objections at all to moving in there. I think as far as a healthy building, I mentioned to you, we need to make that building healthy now. We can't wait for a decision to be made on a public safety facility. We have employees there that we need to ensure their safety. So regardless of whether it's the police department that's in there or ultimately the school department, we need to remediate any health issues with that building now. And that's what I know the chief has been working on getting done. Again, those things can't wait. They have to be done regardless of who's occupying that building. I think what I would probably suggest might be, because a couple of the questions that are raised are legal questions, I think it would be good for us, the town administration, to meet with our town council and just go over some of the specifics with him as far as how would this play out if we were to put out an RFQ or an RFP, what steps need to be in place for us to do that, and then kind of come up with a timeline, if that would be helpful to the committee, so we can actually see, to answer some of Rick's questions. What's the sequencing is? How would it work? And what would need to be done? When do you need the vote? When do you need to have the approval for the funding? When do you need to go out and secure the land? So maybe we can get some of those legal type of questions answered from town council, and then get back with the committee so you can make an informed decision as to how to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that's something we should wait on, or do you think we could be looking at least to get the feeling of the committee that's present tonight to see if this is something we want to continue with, even through getting those answers? I think it's appropriate.
Through the chair, I think it's appropriate to get the flavor of the committee now before we move to the next step. I think one of the things that we haven't done is looking at the legal aspect of it because we want to make sure that the project is going to proceed before we start incurring some expenses for town council to get involved. So it would be good, I think, for us to know what the flavor of the committee is. Is the committee seeking to ultimately recommend that this go forward as a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen to put a ballot question on? Is the committee willing to support the process moving forward from here? In which case, then we can start getting some of the more legal answers for you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any other questions before I look for a motion? We've been at it for an hour and 15 minutes now. Any other questions for town administration or the tech Don for being with us tonight? Okay. Is anybody willing to make a motion relative to whether the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee chooses to proceed with discussions relative to a new public safety complex for the town of Auburn, in pending, more information from town council, town administration. I'd be looking for some sort of motion for this committee to continue and to move the process forward. Do I have somebody willing to phrase some sort of?
Kevin, can we make a motion to have the town administration, going forward to get this project not started, but to get it so that we can give them an answer tonight on which way we want to go?
You'd be looking for a motion to continue the process with the committee and for town administration to provide us some more information relative to site acquisition and the legal issues. Is that correct? JD, is that the question? Sort of paraphrasing your motion, but I just want to make sure I had it all in there.
Sure, that was it.
Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Dowd. No smiling, Julie. Do I have a second? Second on Mr. Dowd's motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a second from Lieutenant Moss. All in favor? We'll go around. I'll call him out. Our newest member, Sean Steele.
Aye, in favor.
All in favor? Rocco?
Yes, in favor.
Julie Balonis?
Yes, in favor.
Rick?
Yes.
Is yes. Glenn?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes, in favor.
Mark seconded. And Sergeant Charlton? I think he's in the, are you in the affirmative there, Kenny? Okay, we've got some audience. Just give me a thumbs up. There we go. Okay, so I think it's unanimous that with the committee will continue to proceed with the discussions relative to the public safety complex. Any other business for tonight? Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Rick makes the motion, Rocco seconds, all in favor. I'll just take a thumbs up. We don't have to go through the roll call again. Okay. Everybody, motion is accepted. Have a good night. Thank you for your time.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Too.
Thank you.
Bye.